The afternoon my parents handed the keys to my childhood home to my younger brother. Nobody bothered to call me. I learned about it from a photo my aunt posted online. My father was smiling. My mother had one arm around my brother, Ethan, and his wife. The caption read, "A fresh start for the kids. Family always comes first." I stared at that picture for a long time. For 8 years I had been sending money every month to help my parents stay in that house after Dad's back injury forced him into early retirement. I never asked for ownership. I never expected applause. I simply believed that keeping a roof over their heads mattered. Apparently, I had been paying for a gift that belonged to someone else. 3 months later, my parents called with exciting news. They wanted to spend retirement in the mountain home I had built alone. When I said I needed time to think, my mother laughed softly. "It's family, Olivia," she said, as though that explained everything. "My name is Olivia Harper. I'm 36 years old, and I design custom homes in Western North Carolina. People think architects spend their lives drawing beautiful buildings. Mostly, we solve problems. We learn that every structure depends on what nobody notices. A beam behind the wall, a foundation under the floor. Strength is usually invisible. I suppose that's why my family never noticed mine. Growing up, Ethan was the dreamer. I was the dependable one. If he forgot a deadline, I helped. If he lost money, I covered it. If my parents needed someone to drive them to appointments or fix paperwork, my phone rang first. They called it love. I called it responsibility. I didn't realize those words weren't always the same. 8 years earlier, Dad confessed they were falling behind on mortgage payments. He sounded embarrassed. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with blueprints spread across it while he struggled to ask for help. I told him yes before he even finished. Not because I was rich, because I couldn't imagine letting them lose the only house we'd ever known. From then on, I quietly transferred money every month. Sometimes it meant postponing vacations. Sometimes it meant working weekends. Every payment felt like another brick holding the family together. Nobody asked what it cost me. Eventually, my business grew. After years of saving, I bought 5 wooded acres overlooking a quiet lake and built a modest cedar home with my own hands guiding every decision. It wasn't extravagant. It was peaceful. The first evening I sat on the porch listening to the wind through the trees, I remember thinking one sentence: "No one can take this away from me." I wish I had understood that people don't always need ownership papers. Sometimes they simply rewrite the story. After Ethan received the childhood house, my mother began asking strange questions. How many bedrooms did my place have? Was the downstairs suite comfortable? Did the property have enough room for another car? I answered casually. I didn't recognize the pattern. Then came the phone call. "Now that Ethan has the family house," Mom said warmly, "your father and I thought we'd move into your place. You'll hardly notice us. It's the perfect retirement home." She spoke as though the decision had already been made. I asked why they hadn't mentioned this before. There was silence. Then she answered, "We assumed you'd want us there." That word, assumed, it stayed with me long after we hung up. 2 days later, my friend Claire came over. She manages property contracts for a real estate firm. We sat on my porch drinking coffee while I explained everything. She listened without interrupting. Finally, she looked around the house I'd designed from an empty piece of land. "They've convinced themselves your success belongs to the family," she said quietly. "Don't argue with the story. Just protect the truth." I didn't sleep much that week. Then Saturday arrived. I drove home from a job site and saw a moving truck parked outside my driveway. My parents' sedan sat beside it. Ethan's pickup was behind both. Boxes covered my front porch. My mother stood in the doorway measuring curtains. She smiled the moment she saw me. "There you are," she said cheerfully. "We decided to get everything unloaded before dinner." Not asked, decided. My father avoided my eyes. Ethan carried a recliner toward my living room. "This just makes sense," he said. "You'll still have plenty of space." I felt something inside me become perfectly still. Not anger, clarity. I invited everyone inside. Made coffee. Let them explain why this was best for everyone. Mom talked about aging. Dad talked about stairs. Ethan talked about family sticking together. Every argument sounded reasonable. Every argument ignored one simple fact. This was my home. When they finished, I stood and walked to the bookshelf beside the fireplace. I removed a folder. Inside were the building permits, purchase records, mortgage documents, insurance papers, and every receipt from the years I'd spent creating this place. I laid them carefully on the table. I built this house, I said quietly. I paid every bill. I signed every document. No one spoke. Then I placed another folder beside it. Bank transfers. 8 years of them. Every payment I'd made toward my parents' mortgage. Dad's eyes dropped immediately. Mom frowned. I never wanted repayment, I continued. I only wanted honesty. The room became very quiet. Outside, rain began tapping against the windows. Finally, my father whispered, "I remember every payment." My mother answered before I could, "That doesn't change anything. Family shares." I looked at her. For years, I said, family meant I gave and everyone else received. She folded her arms. "So you're choosing a house over your parents?" "No," I shook my head slowly. "I'm choosing boundaries over guilt." Nobody shouted. Nobody stormed out. Somehow that made the silence heavier. My father stood first. He walked onto the porch without saying a word. After several minutes he returned. His shoulders looked smaller than I remembered. "I'm sorry," he said. "I let your mother and Ethan make decisions because it was easier than standing beside you. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply honest." My brother stared at the floor. "I didn't know you paid that much," he admitted. "You never asked," I replied. Mom remained standing by the window. She looked around the house one last time. Perhaps for the first time, she truly saw it. Not as the family's retirement home. Not as another resource waiting to be shared. But as something her daughter had earned. They packed the boxes back into the truck before sunset. No one slammed a door. No one raised a voice. As they drove away, the porch became quiet again. That evening I watched the lake grow dark beneath the mountains. For years I believed love meant making myself smaller so everyone else could feel secure. I know better now. Helping people is generous. Erasing yourself is not. The childhood house was gone. I couldn't change that. But the home I built remained exactly where it belonged. And for the first time in my life, I walked through my own front door feeling not like the foundation everyone stood on, but like the person who finally understood she deserved a place to stand herself. The afternoon, my parents invited the whole family to their lawyer's office. I thought they were finally putting their affairs in order. I even brought flowers for my mother. She laughed when she saw them and told me I still worried too much. I smiled because that was what I had done my whole life. Worry quietly. Help quietly. Disappear quietly. Then the lawyer slid a copy of the will across the polished conference table. My younger sister, Rachel, would inherit the family home. She would receive my parents' savings. She would become executor of the estate. My name appeared exactly once. "We leave our love to our daughter, Emma." Nothing else. No explanation. No conversation. Just one sentence after 12 years of paying their bills. Nobody looked at me. I folded the document, placed it back on the table, and thanked the lawyer for his time. 3 weeks later, my father called. Their electricity had been disconnected. For the first time in years, I let the phone ring. "My name is Emma Collins. I'm 38 years old, and I own a payroll company outside Portland, Oregon. My work is simple. People trust me to make sure everyone gets paid correctly. I've always believed numbers tell the truth long before people do. A bank statement never lies. A receipt never forgets. People do, especially when remembering would make them uncomfortable." Growing up, Rachel was everyone's sunshine. She was spontaneous, funny, adventurous. I was dependable. If something broke, I fixed it. If someone forgot a birthday, I remembered. If my parents fell behind on expenses, somehow the problem quietly became mine. Nobody ever assigned me that job. I simply stepped into every empty space until people stopped noticing I was carrying the weight. 12 years earlier, my father lost his small hardware store. Retirement arrived years sooner than expected. Their savings disappeared faster than anyone admitted. One evening, Dad came to my apartment looking older than I had ever seen him. He asked whether I could help just for a little while. A little while became 12 years. Every month I covered something: electricity, insurance, property taxes, medication, sometimes groceries, sometimes repairs. Whenever they thanked me, I told them not to worry. They're my parents, I would say. I want to help. That was true. What I never admitted was how many evenings I skipped vacations, how many weekends I accepted extra clients, how many dreams I postponed. Love became another monthly payment. I stopped counting, or at least I thought I had. My husband Daniel noticed before I did. One evening he watched me schedule another automatic transfer. You know, he said gently, helping people shouldn't require disappearing. I laughed. I'll stop when they don't need me. He didn't argue. He simply reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Sometimes the people who love you most recognize your exhaustion before you do. Months before the will reading, my mother began talking constantly about Rachel, how much she deserved stability, how difficult life had been for her, how raising children was expensive. Every conversation quietly bent toward my sister. I barely noticed it had always been that way. Then came the meeting. The lawyer explained every page carefully. Rachel nodded with grateful tears. My parents smiled proudly. I watched the document instead. There wasn't anger. Not immediately. There was something quieter. The strange feeling that an invisible story had finally become visible. For 12 years I had funded the life they planned to leave someone else. Nobody mentioned those years, not because they were cruel, because sacrifice that arrives consistently begins to look like weather. Expected, invisible. Afterward, Mom hugged me. You understand, don't you? I answered honestly. I understand more than you think. That evening I opened a cabinet in my office. Inside sat 12 folders. Each year had its own file. Bank statements, canceled checks, receipts, insurance payments, medical invoices. I had organized everything because that's who I was, not to keep score. Simply because accurate records make difficult situations easier. I spent hours reading through those folders, not searching for revenge, searching for myself. Somewhere between thousands of dollars and hundreds of transfers, I realized something painful. Every payment had protected my parents. None had protected me. The next morning I canceled every automatic payment. The silence after each confirmation email felt enormous, not triumphant. Necessary. 2 weeks later my father called. The electricity bill was overdue. Could I handle it this month? Just this once. I closed my eyes. For years those words had unlocked the same answer. Yes. This time I asked a question instead. What happened to Rachel? The line stayed quiet. Finally he sighed. She has her own expenses. So do I. He didn't speak again. Neither did I. The call ended gently. But something permanent had changed. Sunday arrived. My parents appeared at my front door without warning. Mom carried a pie. Dad wore the expression he always wore when hoping someone else would solve a problem. We sat around my kitchen table. The conversation wandered politely before reaching its destination. Dad cleared his throat. We've been thinking maybe you could start covering the bills again until things settle. I looked around my kitchen, the home Daniel and I had built together, the walls we painted ourselves, the life we financed without asking anyone else. Then I returned my attention to them. I read the will several times, I said quietly. Mom stiffened. That has nothing to do with this. I think it has everything to do with this. Nobody interrupted. I wasn't heard because of the money. I continued. I was heard because 12 years disappeared from your memory. Dad lowered his eyes. Mom folded her hands tightly together. We never asked you to expect anything. No, I replied. You only expected me. The room fell silent. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally I stood and retrieved a single folder. Not 12. Just one. Inside was a summary. Every dollar. Every year. No accusations. Only numbers. I slid it across the table. Dad adjusted his glasses slowly. His shoulders sank with each page. I didn't know it was this much. He whispered, You never wanted to know. I answered. Mom looked at the final total for a long time, then she surprised me. She began crying, not loudly, Not dramatically, quiet tears that seemed to come from somewhere she had ignored for years. I kept telling myself you were doing fine, she said. You always looked so strong. I learned to look strong because someone had to. She nodded without lifting her head. For the first time, nobody tried to defend the past. Nobody blamed Rachel. Nobody blamed circumstances. The truth sat between us without needing louder voices. Dad finally spoke. We treated your generosity like income. It was the most honest sentence I'd heard in years. I didn't ask them to change the will. I didn't ask for repayment. Neither would have given me what I truly wanted. I won't be paying the household bills anymore. I said, I'll help you build a realistic budget. I'll help you find financial assistance if you qualify. I'll always be your daughter, but I won't keep being your emergency fund. Mom reached across the table. She took my hand exactly as she had when I was a little girl. I'm sorry we forgot what your love was costing you. Those words didn't erase 12 years. They couldn't. Some things don't disappear because someone finally says the right sentence, but they can become lighter. That afternoon, my parents left carrying the same folder they had arrived without. I watched their car disappear down the street. Daniel stepped onto the porch beside me. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The evening sun settled across our yard, peacefully, quietly. I realized something then. Being generous is a beautiful thing. Being invisible is not. For years I believed love meant giving until nothing remained. Now I understand something different. The people who truly love you should never require you to disappear so they can feel secure. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't writing another check, it's finally allowing their own life to count. The day my sister accepted an award for saving the family business, everyone stood and applauded. I stood too, not because I believed the words, because after 15 years of staying quiet, applause had become another language I knew how to speak without meaning it. The audience saw my younger sister, Lauren, smiling beneath bright lights, thanking our parents for believing in her. She thanked our employees. She thanked her husband. She even thanked luck. She never once mentioned the person who had spent a decade working before sunrise and long after sunset to keep that business alive. She never said my name. 3 weeks later, my father called and asked me to attend a family meeting. He said it was important. He said everyone needed to clear the air. I had no idea that by sunset, the story my family had repeated for years would finally meet something stronger than memory. It would meet proof. My name is Hannah Brooks. I'm 39 years old, and I live outside Lexington, Kentucky. My parents owned a small furniture workshop for almost 40 years. We weren't wealthy. We simply built good tables, sturdy cabinets, and kitchen chairs meant to outlive the people who bought them. My father always said real craftsmanship happens where nobody looks. Inside the joints. Behind the finish. Hidden strength. Looking back, I realize I became exactly like the furniture we sold. Useful, reliable, mostly unnoticed. Lauren was 4 years younger than me. She had charm. She could walk into any room and leave with 3 new friends. Customers loved her. Relatives adored her. She made people feel important. I made payroll. I balanced invoices. Negotiated supplier contracts. Stayed until midnight repairing equipment when machines failed. Nobody took photographs of those nights. Success rarely looks exciting while it's happening. 10 years earlier, the workshop nearly closed. A large client declared bankruptcy. Orders vanished almost overnight. Dad sat in his office staring at unpaid bills. Mom cried quietly in the break room because she didn't know how we'd pay 23 employees by Friday. I emptied my savings account. Then I refinanced my home. Nobody asked me to. I simply couldn't watch people lose everything. The business survived. One difficult season became another. Then another. Eventually orders returned. Customers came back. The workshop recovered. Whenever people congratulated Lauren for helping rebuild the company, she smiled politely. She never corrected them. At first I told myself it didn't matter. Families don't keep score. But after enough years, silence begins telling its own story. It tells people the wrong version often enough that eventually everyone believes it. Even you. When Dad retired, Lauren became the public face of the business. She appeared in local newspapers. She accepted awards. She gave interviews. Whenever reporters asked how the company survived difficult times, she spoke about determination, vision, hard work. She wasn't lying. She was simply leaving someone out. Me. The evening of the award ceremony, my husband Noah drove home in complete silence. Halfway there, he finally spoke. Does anyone actually know what you did? I looked through the windshield for a long time before answering. I don't think they remember anymore. He reached over and squeezed my hand. Then maybe it's time they did. A week later, my father invited everyone to Sunday dinner. Lauren, her husband, Mom, Noah and me. His voice sounded tired. We need to talk as a family. When we arrived, Dad wasn't sitting at the dining table. He was in his office. The old office where I had spent countless evenings organizing bills while everyone else slept. He opened a filing cabinet. Then another. Finally, he carried out 3 heavy binders. I found these while cleaning, he said quietly. I recognized them immediately. My handwriting covered nearly every page. Financial statements, emergency loan agreements, supplier negotiations, bank approvals. Every document from the years the company nearly disappeared. Dad placed the binders on the dining table. Lauren smiled uncertainly. What are those? My memory, Dad answered. Nobody spoke. He opened the first binder. Inside sat a loan agreement. My signature, only mine. The amount was enough to save payroll that winter. I had almost forgotten how frightened I was signing it. Dad hadn't. I always meant to pay you back, he whispered. You told me not to worry. I meant it. He nodded slowly. I know. He kept turning pages. Cancelled checks, bank transfers, equipment invoices, letters from creditors. Every difficult decision recorded in black ink. Lauren stared at the papers as though seeing another version of our family for the first time. I didn't know. Her voice barely carried across the room. I believed her. That was somehow the saddest part. She truly didn't know. Because nobody had ever told her. Because I never had. Mom covered her mouth with both hands. I thought the bank approved those loans. It didn't, Dad answered. Hannah did. The room became perfectly still. Outside, wind moved softly through the maple trees. No one reached for food. No one looked comfortable. Dad closed the final binder. I've listened to people congratulate Lauren for years. He looked toward my sister with kindness, not anger. You worked hard. She nodded slowly. You earned your success. Then he turned toward me. But none of it exists without Hannah. His voice broke. Not one piece. Lauren lowered her eyes. I accepted praise that wasn't completely mine. You accepted silence, I replied gently. They aren't always the same thing. She looked at me for a long moment. I'm sorry. No excuses. No explanations. Just 2 words. Sometimes simple words carry enormous weight. Dad stood and walked to the bookshelf. He returned holding a framed photograph. The workshop during its hardest year. Employees standing together outside the building. I was in the back row wearing dusty work clothes, holding a clipboard. Lauren stood beside Dad near the front. Dad smiled sadly. I used to think leadership belonged to the person everyone could see. He looked toward me. I was wrong. He placed a photograph in the center of the table. This business survived because someone carried burdens nobody else noticed. Nobody argued. There wasn't anything left to argue about. The evidence spoke quietly, just as it always had. After dinner, Lauren asked if we could walk outside. We crossed the old parking lot together. The workshop lights glowed through familiar windows. I should have asked more questions, she said. I liked believing I fixed everything. I smiled faintly. We all like simple stories. She nodded. But simple stories aren't always true. No, they usually leave somebody out. She wiped her eyes. The next board meeting. You don't have to. I do. Her answer came without hesitation. I've spent years standing in front of work I didn't fully understand. A month later, the company held its annual employee gathering. Lauren stood before the staff exactly as she had many times before. This time was different. She told them about the hardest years. The emergency loans. The impossible payrolls. The nights someone stayed behind balancing numbers while everyone else slept. Then she called me onto the stage. I almost refused. Old habits are difficult to break. Instead, I walked forward. The applause sounded different this time. Not louder, just honest. Afterward, Dad slipped a folded note into my hand. Inside, he had written one sentence: "The strongest foundation is usually the part nobody sees." But that doesn't mean it should never be thanked. I still keep that note in my desk drawer. Not because I need proof anymore. Because sometimes even quiet people deserve something to remind them they were there all along. The family meeting didn't erase the years my sacrifices went unnoticed. It couldn't, but it changed something more important. For the first time, the story belonged to the truth instead of the silence. And sometimes that is the only justice a heart has been waiting for.